not too weird. He's going to talk about swap acceleration near the glass transition, cause and implications. Please.
Well, first I would like to, it's a great honor for me to be here for Giorgio's birthday, really. So thanks for the organizer for inviting me. Well, my connection to Giorgio, I was doing a PhD in France, so it's very hard to be not under the influence of Giorgio in France. And then I went to the US and I started to work on rather practical questions like suspension, granular, how they flow and things like that. But a few years back, the sort of question I was working on, Giorgio and his colleagues here in the room actually made, I think, very useful contribution for those very practical questions. So even over there in the US, I was under the influence. So today I decided to talk about a topic that I think is also very dear to Giorgio, which is the glass transition, you know, how a liquid becomes a solid. So this talk is about this algorithm. Well, essentially I can tell you now, so think of it as a liquid, you change the temperature, but instead of just having the particles moving around, you take a pair of particles and you actually swap them. And those algorithms were known for a very long time, but it's only recently that they were sort of optimized and that it was established that they can be extremely powerful. So they can actually equilibrate the system at temperatures that are quite below the TG for the normal dynamics. So there are two things I want to discuss. The first one, which is most of the talk, is why does this algorithm work? And that's something that's done with Carolina Brito in the room and Aidan Lerner. And then I want to talk about a more controversial, more topic of debate, which is those observations, how much actually can they rule out some theoretical approach on the glass transition? So there are many opinions in the room, so I felt it would be interesting to exchange on that. Okay, so swap dynamics. Okay, so again, traditional dynamics, you have the particles just moving around. And now you have this idea to take a polydispersed system, you take a pair of particles and you exchange them. Many authors, actually, Giorgio was an early contributor to that algorithm, but it actually even predates that. And the list is not complete. Itamar in the room and others have contributed to it. Okay, and when you start to add, you have the local moves of the particle, but in addition to that you swap them. You can still equilibrate the system, but as I told you, you can do it much more efficiently. So that's represented in this plot. So what you look at is a relaxation timescale tau alpha, at which essentially the system loses the memory of its initial condition. You have this tau alpha as a function of the inverse temperature. And the curves you see here, okay, you have different curves because you have different systems, but that's for the normal dynamics. That's a log scale on the computer. So this is the work by Berthier and co-worker here. On the computer, you can maybe change the time scale by 5 orders of magnitudes. And for normal dynamics, you see that it shoots up like this. But now if you start to add those swap moves, those exchanges, this is the time scale you see. You can still equilibrate the system, but the dynamics is just much, much, much faster. So in this field, we tend to fit those curves. The real glass transition in experiment means 15 order of magnitudes of increase of time scale. If you use the usual fit in the experimental literature and you use them on those plots, you would predict where the real experimental glass transition would be, 15 order of magnitude of time scale. It would be around here. So you see that with those swap moves, actually you can beat the glass transition. Here the dynamic is still super slow. Like you increased only the time scale by 2 decades or so. Okay? To make that work, so that's a rather old idea, but it was optimized by taking very broad and continuous polydispersity of the particles. That was a sort of secret. Okay, so the first question is, why does it work? But before that, I should say, why do we care? One criticism would be that there are very special systems, the system where you can do that. They have this very continuous and broad polydispersity. Well, I think one of the reasons we care is that thanks to that, you can prepare glasses that are extremely more stable than the usual glasses on the computer, and you start to recover properties that you actually see in experimental glasses. For example, if you think about their brittleness, how they break and how they fracture, you can reproduce what you could not do before, the property of, for example, certain bulk metallic glasses. Another reason that I think is important is that this possibly constrains the nature of the glass transition and the models that are there to describe it. There is another reason which I think is quite important practically. I guess most of you know that glasses have special excitation at low temperature. I mean, the dominant excitation are not phonons, they are so-called two-level system, atoms or group of atoms that can rearrange between two configurations. Actually, for many practical purposes, it's annoying to have these two-level systems. And it was recently discovered that you can prepare extremely stable glasses by vapor deposition, and that those glasses actually don't have those excitations. So the question is why it is so. And here's the idea that I want to think about SWAP and to use SWAP to sort of constrain the kind of excitation that you have in those very deep states that SWAP can reach. Okay. And here it's going to be very much a real space approach. Okay, so first I'm going to connect SWAP to sort of ground canonical formulation of polydispersed liquids. We sort of rediscovered it, but it's actually quite old. So the way we would So that's my polydispersity rho of R, okay? Distribution of radii, and alpha will be a key parameter. It's how broad this distribution is. So the usual point of view is that, okay, your total potential energy in a system like that is a function of the particle position, that's a small r, and their radii. But those guys are frozen, and really your degrees of freedom are the number of particles times the number of dimension of space, nd. Those are the position of the particles. That's the usual point of view. But in fact, you have another point of view which is equivalent in the thermodynamic limit, where instead of enforcing strictly the polydispersity, you enforce it with the chemical potential. And then instead of just dealing with the potential energy, now you have this, what I will call this effective energy, which is the potential energy, but then you have another term. It's the sum on all particles of this potential mu of R, R being the radii. So this chemical potential will be a smooth function if rho of R is smooth. And it's actually chosen so as to reproduce exactly the desired polydispersity. So now that's a change of perspective, because you can think of now this new problem as not having just nd degrees of freedom, but both your position and the particle radii, both of them are degrees of freedom. Okay, so now you can think about breathing particles, particles that can adapt their size. Okay, so now you can think about equilibrating the system in a different way. Instead of just playing with the particle position, you can now allow for this degree of freedom and just choose any dynamics you like that will equilibrate this effective potential. I will argue that in large systems, SWAP, exchanging two particles, falls into this class of ground canonical dynamics. Because if you think of it, in a very large system, exchanging two particles is just like exchanging one particle with a bath. And the property of this bath has a chemical potential that precisely has to be chosen so as to reproduce the correct rho of R. Okay, so SWAP falls into this class of ground canonical dynamics. Everything I'm going to say will apply to all such dynamics, but I will just use the term SWAP in what follows. Yes. Yes. All right. So now the question is how how this will actually, I'm going to argue that that's going to completely change the sort of landscape of the problem. And to think about the landscape, we'll need to think about the Hessian. We tend to look at the Hessian of this energy, but now we're going to look at the Hessian of this effective energy, which is a bigger object, right? Because now you have one more degree of freedom per particle. Okay, so the key parameters that will be important is actually which guy dominates. So to think about that, the important quantity here would be the sort of stiffness associated with this breathing mode. Okay, the second derivative, the typical second derivative of that quantity, and I will call it Kr. And you have to compare it with K, which is the stiffness of the interaction between particles. Okay? So what will happen is that if Kr, this mode, is much stiffer than the interaction between particles, the fact that particles can breathe is going to be irrelevant. So you will have just the normal dynamics again. But if breathing is much easier than pushing particles apart, then you completely change the physics. And when we'll think about the sort of normal modes of this extended Hessian, then the two set of variables, particle position and radii, are going to be completely mixed. It turned out, and I won't go through the calculation, but in those two regimes where one stiffness is much larger than the other, you can actually study the spectrum of this effective Hessian perturbatively. Okay, so I'm going to focus on a specific system. And this system is going to be soft repulsive particle with a finite range interaction. Actually a model of granular materials, if you want. Okay? Those are the particles that when people study jamming, for example, which they use. So they are half-sided spring, harmonic potential, and then nothing. That's how they interact. Again, the two parameters that are going to be important is the polydispersity. Again, its magnitude, the distribution, the variance of the distribution of radii is alpha. And the other parameters that will be important is actually, in relative term, how much overlap you have between particles. So this I will call it delta. Okay, so it's this distance divided by the typical radii. It's a dimensionless number. Okay, so now in a system like that, you can ask, I told you what's important is this ratio of stiffnesses. So what is this then? Well, if you have breathing particles, their size, they can adapt their size. So their size is going to be governed by the forces that are pushing on it. So actually the polydispersity will be given by the fluctuation of those forces acting on you, divided by Kr, the stiffness of this mode. And the fluctuation of forces are going to be of order of the typical contact forces between two particles. It's just the stiffness of the particles times delta. Okay? So you immediately get an interesting result that this ratio K over Kr goes like alpha over delta. So what you expect is that obviously if you want to have a strong effect of swapping, you need to have a large alpha, large polydispersity, but large compared to what? Well, compared to how much particles overlap. If the particles, even if you have a large polydispersity, but particles are really overlapping a lot, swap will lead to a small effect. Okay? Okay, so now we can think about the landscape and inherent structures if you suddenly quench this effective potential. Which would be called packing in the context of the jamming transition. And you can ask under which condition they should be mechanically stable. So the Hessian should be positive definite. How constraining is that? So let me first tell you about a well-known result, which is if you don't have swap for normal particles. Then it's known that the two key variables, quantities that control stability for those packings are the coordination. The more contacts you make, the more stable you are. And also the pressure. The more pressure you have, actually the least stable you are, just like in buckling. And so you can derive a phase diagram, and here it's a sort of excess coordination. It's a coordination average number of contact per particle minus the Maxwell coordination, which is twice the spatial dimension. That's the log of the pressure or the particle overlap. And you have a line that separates configurations that will be unstable and configurations that should be stable. Okay, you have a phase diagram for stability. So we computed this a while ago, and we noticed at the time that packing actually live very close to this line, which we call marginal stability. And that's something that was actually proven in some infinite dimension models by Giorgio and others more recently. Okay? And in this language, it corresponds to full replica symmetry breaking. So in this line, your Hessian is marginal. It has modes, it's very close to an elastic instability. It has modes that are almost unstable, that are very different from plane waves. Okay, now we can do the same trick for those breathing particles. Okay, so that was when you don't breathe, and now the black line, you again have a stability line separating stable from unstable configuration. Now, not surprisingly from what I told you, what will matter is how this particle overlap. How does is it bigger or smaller than this particle polydispersity alpha? So if it's much larger, if you're far away from jamming for a given polydispersity, those two curves, essentially the effect of allowing for swap is very small. And actually you can compute the difference between those two lines perturbatively. This difference in relative terms goes like alpha over delta. Okay, so you have in this region a very small effect of swap. But that's completely different actually if you're close to the jamming transition or if the polydispersity is huge. Then you enter in another regime. And what you can prove, and I will ask you to accept it, is that this black line here becomes flat. So you have a crossover essentially between a flat behavior and the behavior you have for normal particles that actually don't breathe. Okay, so that's already telling us something a bit weird. So I told you that for any dynamics we do, if we have normal dynamics, the normal one, we tend to sit very close to this line. Packings are marginally stable. But now I'm telling you that actually this entire region of space is forbidden if I use these breathing particles, these swap dynamics, because I have to be stable. So then it's telling me that even if I do a steepest descent, even if I don't have activation, I do a steepest descent with this effective potential, I will reach configurations that I could never see before. Okay? So that's something that is easy to test numerically. So you choose a given mu of r that would correspond to defined polydispersity, and then we just do that. We just do a steepest descent in this potential with those breathing particles. And at the end, we go to minima of this effective energy, and we can measure both this coordination and the pressure. In fact, we work at fixed pressure, and we obtain minima like that. And what you see here actually are different curves corresponding to different configurations that you reach by having different polydispersity. In black, it's when the polydispersity is 0 and you recover what you would have if you didn't have any swap. And when you increase the polydispersity, this asymptote goes up. What you can do, sorry, it vanished here, is that you can rescale those axes, just a rescaling that would correspond to this marginal line, the scaling of the marginal line I derived before. And what you see then is that all those data actually collapse. So it's consistent with the idea that even for this new effective potential, you're also again marginally stable. Your packings live on the edge of an elastic instability, but it's a different elastic instability with different modes. Actually, this is something that Pierre Francesco have confirmed in a modified version of the perceptron, this marginal stability here. Okay, but that also proves the point that here, without having any activation, we can reach very stable, very well coordinated packing, inherent structure that you could never actually achieve with normal dynamics. Okay, so I have just have one slide for this notion of excitation and gap and related to this story of two-level system. So if you go back to this phase diagram, okay, you go back to this phase diagram, I told you if I have breathing particles, they will sit close to this line. And the fact that this line is, the fact that you sit close to this line also is visible in the Hessian because you do see elastic modes that are almost unstable. So what you're supposed to see in black, that doesn't come out very nicely, the density of vibrational modes as a function of frequency. And in black you have the effective Hessian for the breathing particles. And it is bimodal, I won't explain you why, but what you're supposed to notice is that indeed it does have mode at super low frequency. It's a finite system, so it's never strictly zero, but it's very low frequency compared to what? Well, compared to this red curve. And this red curve is what you get is you look at the same configuration, but then you shut down the ability for particle to breathe. So you just look at the Hessian of the energy, of the usual potential energy. And then, as you expect from this diagram, you're at a finite distance from this marginal line. And indeed, what you find is that now the spectrum is gapped. The first guy you see here are plane waves. So in an infinite system, you would still have plane waves, obviously going to very low frequency. But all these additional soft modes that you have in those packings are gone. Okay, so those arguments actually prove that in those polydispersed configurations, if you go to those very deep states that must exist because you can reach them by this swap dynamics, then indeed the excitation spectrum will be different and will be deprived of many excitations. We went further than that, so that's what's gapped here are those sort of extended soft modes. Actually, it's technical, but there are also quasi-localized modes in those glasses, and they are also gapped in the same way. Or maybe I didn't comment on this figure, but it's interesting for the next slides. It's that you could ask, what are actually the modes that are almost unstable if I consider this breathing system? So you can look again at this spectrum and look at these first modes, and now you have to represent both the displacement of the particle, but also their ability to breathe. So in black, you have black lines, those are the displacement, and the breathing is a color. So if it's red, it means it grew. If it's blue, it means it shrinked. And you see that those modes are not now, in terms of their displacement field alone, they are not really divergence-free. You can have a region where there is a flux, and the particles would actually shrink there. Okay, so now that was for the fact that the argument as to why with swap you can generate very coordinated configurations that actually would have gapped excitations. But now I want to go back to the glass transition and think about the energy landscape. And it will not surprise you, indeed, the sort of energy level that you reach by even using this steepest descent swap algorithm is much lower than the usual steepest descent. So what you can do conceptually, but also numerically, is, well, let's think about the landscape, the usual landscape of the normal dynamics. Let's say you're at infinite temperature, and you quench, and I will call U infinity the energy that you reach by doing that. But now, once you're in a state like that, suddenly you let the particle breathe. And in general, all those states here will be completely unstable. You don't, again, you just do a steepest descent, but in this breathing potential, and boom, you're going to again reach inherent structure, but they will be at some energy U alpha, which will be smaller than U infinity. Okay, so you're really destroying the landscape, and the location where metastable state appears, it's not the same energy level. You can systematically measure that. Here what's plotted is the ratio of those two energies, And unsurprisingly, you see that when polydispersity increases, that's going from black to blue, the effect is larger. But again, as I told you, if you go away from the jamming transition and you compress your particle more, the effect decay. Again, in some regime, you can collapse this curve, and so what you get, especially when you're far away from this jamming transition, is that in relative terms, the effect is proportional to this alpha over delta. Okay? Okay. So how does this connect to the glass transition? And here I will follow this picture proposed by Goldstein, but that's very much contained in mean field model and mode coupling theory. So here I should cite some work by Giorgio and co-workers, actually was they really pushed and also studied numerically this question. So the idea that at large temperature, okay, so unlike in mean field, it's a crossover, but so at very large temperature, you live essentially close to saddle. So you can flow without any activation. But there is a transition temperature where those saddles essentially disappear, and then you live close to minima and you need to have activation. Okay, let's assume that this picture is correct. And now let's think about where this transition would take place if you have swap or non-swap dynamics. Okay? So as you vary the temperature, you will go down in energy. So for normal dynamics, you will have essentially a given temperature where this transition takes place. But now we know that if we use this swap dynamics, actually those states here are even not stable. So before you encounter a stable state, you actually need to dive further in energy, which obviously means that you need to dive below in temperature. Okay? So essentially, in this view, the fact that swap fastens the dynamics is that it creates an entire range of temperature where the dynamics used to be activated, the normal dynamics is activated, whereas the swap dynamics is actually not. And what the swap dynamic is doing is essentially flowing along modes like the one here, right? Okay, so this view is consistent with recent calculation of Francesco and co-worker using replica and also Smile work using mode coupling transition. This argument here, it's thinking about inherent structure, so it's the energy landscape. Really, it should be the free energy landscape. So in our paper, we also do this analysis for the free energy landscape of hard spheres. Okay? So I think this point, essentially that when you have swap, it's as if this Goldstein or mode coupling transition was shifted, I don't think is very controversial and is, I think, getting well established. Okay, so let me conclude on that part. Essentially what we're saying is having swap, it's just like adding 1 degree of freedom on the particles. And what that does, it modifies the landscape and change at which energy level you actually have metastable state. As a consequence, activation and glass transition are delayed. You can reach very stable deep states with those dynamics even without having any activation. And another interesting fact is that in those very deep states, soft modes, those excitations are actually gapped. Okay, so now I have a few slides where I want to discuss the following question. Do these results rule out some scenarios of the glass transition, which is much more debated and maybe interesting for discussions. Okay, so we argued that so what we argued in that paper is that a bunch of theories, which there are many theories like that, in many theories, actually the rapid slowing down of liquids, here I'm not talking about the mode coupling transition, but when the activation in real liquid, so when you're rather deep in the supercooled liquid phase, is related to the growth of a thermodynamic length scale, psi, okay? And the idea that there is some order growing in the liquid, and that actually to relax, you must break this order. And generally, you would expect that the energy to break this order will be a growing function, so a power law function of this length scale. Okay? There are many theories that think that way, not just one. Okay, so then the barrier in those views is really a thermodynamic barrier. Okay, so what do I mean by thermodynamic barrier? It's the idea that essentially to relax, there is a collective variable or some local order parameters that involves many degrees of freedom, and to relax you have to change this order parameter. And as you change it, you encounter, a maximum in this curve. A scenario like you can think, for example, of nucleation like this. Well, then a powerful result is that if it's true, then let's say if you're doing Monte Carlo dynamics, the given choice of move sets that you allow for your Monte Carlo should not change its energy as long as each move set involves a few number of degrees of freedom. Because then you're going to move essentially continuously along this axis and you cannot escape this maximum. Okay, so in the context of nucleation, say, of a magnet, it's just saying that if you would like to nucleate, maybe it's you would like to have to point down, you have a given nucleation size. Any Monte Carlo which involves a number of spin which is smaller than this nucleation droplet will see essentially the same barrier. Okay? So essentially all the theories explicitly, the way they are formulated does not depend on the choice of dynamical rule that you use. And so essentially we said something very simple, which is, well, now with swap is involving just two particles. In fact, you can even allow to take pairs of particles that are neighbors, and it doesn't change essentially the observations. So it's a local move set, 2 degrees of freedom, and you completely change the dynamic. You can change TG, say, by a factor 2, and the dynamics by 15 decades. So we argued that this observation for swap was going against all those theories. Maybe let me rephrase it. So this is the log of time, relaxation time versus temperature. And this is the swap dynamics, and this is the normal dynamics. And the point is that those guys have, if you're really equilibrated, they have the same thermodynamic properties, but they have a dynamics that's completely different. And so we're saying it's no good for those theories. Actually, the fact that by changing the dynamics, the dynamical rule, you can change a lot the dynamics was known in some examples, but those examples were sort of discarded. And it's when, and there are people in the room knowing very well those models, it's when you add constraint to give dynamical constraint to a model. It was well known that if you do that, you can have a glass transition that occurs at larger temperature. But essentially, it was argued that those constraints, those dynamics are very weird, and so we should not really worry about them. Okay, so here I want to use an idea that was told to me by Roré, actually, thinking about the following system. So think about those ellipses, and they also are polydispersed. So now they can rotate and translate. So you can think about 3 dynamics. You can think about the normal dynamics where your ellipses are just translating and rotating. Okay, so let's say this is this curve. Now you can also think about the swap dynamics where essentially your ellipses are allowed to breathe. So this is this curve. But Roré says, well, you can also think about the dynamics, which is just like the normal dynamics, but you fix angles forever. So this guy, it can translate, but always with the same orientation. If you start with some uniform distribution of orientation, then you can completely equilibrate a system like that. You will also reach equilibrium. And Roré said, well, you say that when you go from normal dynamics to swap, essentially you're adding 1 degree of freedom, or when you go to swap to normal dynamics, you're removing 1 degree of freedom. Well, it's just the same that you're doing here, and so you do expect that the dynamics would be slowed down significantly. That's something that we're actually now looking at with Carolina Brito, and we see. Okay, so the only point I wanted to make here is that I don't think it's fair when people add additional constraints to say, oh, those models are very weird, because if you think of this model with respect to the normal dynamics, well, I would argue that it has the same relationship as the normal dynamics with respect to swap. So you can think about the normal dynamics as being a constraint dynamics of swap, where you've constrained this breathing mode. Okay, so then Jean-Philippe and Giulio and so on, answer to our paper, and they propose the following. So they said, well, it's true that those curves are very different, but maybe it does not disagree with RFOT, because it could be that this difference comes from pre-asymptotic effect, and that at very low temperature, essentially, those curves would be well described by this asymptotic theory and will merge together. And they also propose an interesting pre-asymptotic effect in that paper. I'm not disputing that this could happen, but in my view, if this is what's going on, it means that actually in the regimes that we can observe, this asymptotic RFOT theory is actually not providing guidance or is not predictive, because it does not allow you to distinguish between any of those curves, and they are giantly different. So I think the only way to make the theory predictive would then be to have a quantitative description of what are those pre-asymptotic effects. What I think, subjective opinion, is more going on is that what controls the dynamics has to do with what's changing when those dynamical rules are changing. In particular, the location of the mode coupling transitions, the fact that you have soft modes and things like that. How much time do I have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Okay, so then they can have discussion. So maybe it's just a bit more technical, but okay, so maybe it's still interesting to discuss. This is a good audience to discuss that. It's my last slide. So we argue in this paper that, in our view, there is another difficulty with those kind of thermodynamic theories. And it's that when you want to think about thermodynamic barrier, to do any calculation, to compute anything, you have to assume that you have reached some local equilibrium. And what we argue is that in the supercooled liquids, you don't. So let me actually take a concrete example. So let's think about this random first order theory, and let's think about this length scale psi. So that's a beautiful idea by Giulio and Jean-Philippe, and tested by Andrea Cavagna and others here, is to define this length scale as follows. So you freeze the surrounding of the material, and you let what's inside relax. And then you ask, at which distance can I eventually relax the system or not, this patch of liquids or not? And that defines this length scale. But the way it's defined, you really try to thermalize this to death. You try everything. So for example, if you have polydispersed system, which is typically the case, you swap them in all directions. And so our point is that in real liquids, on time scales, smaller than tau alpha, actually you don't have such equilibration. You don't swap particles around. And it's actually easy to argue that, because if really you had such swap, what you could prove is that you would have a very strong decoupling between the diffusion of the particles and the viscosity, which is not seen. It's called the Stokes-Einstein's breakdown. So the fact that particles do not equilibrate locally appears in the way they diffuse. So that's the question we have, is to define this thermodynamic length, you assume that the phase space is entirely explored. But in real life, on time scale smaller than tau alpha, actually the particles are visiting a much smaller portion of phase space. So then why it is fair to consider actually this definition of this length scale? Okay, so I'm done. I'm finishing now.
Okay, we have more than 5 minutes for discussion, so.
Thank you. So I'm not a great fan of RFOT, but nevertheless, I have a problem with the argument that you provide. Now, swaps don't happen, but swaps don't happen in a physical system. However, I can exchange the positions of two particles, but generically I'll have to do it by moving, some path around, and that this path or the length of this path probably will increase when temperature decreases. So it's not a local move in a physical system.
I don't think it is, yes. If you were swapping particles, that would not be local, yeah.
Sorry? It's not a local move.
If you could equilibrate locally, it would not be by doing this. It would be more complicated move.
Well, long, and we'll have a length scale to actually occur, and probably that length scale will increase with temperature going down. So I have a problem with the argument that you say, this disproves a need or a possibility of having a typical length that is increasing with decreasing temperature, which I think is the central argument that you're trying to make, and I don't understand it.
Well, I think I would like to be specific and precise, and I had two critiques.
Okay.
And so maybe you could point toward which one of the critiques. So one is, when we do the theories, we have to assume some kind of local equilibrium. That's this slide, and I'm saying it's not achieved. And the second is about predictive power. You change the dynamical rules, you can change the dynamics by 15 order of magnitude one direction, 15 order of magnitude the other, TG by factor 2, divided by 2, and the thermodynamics are the same. So now, how do you build a theory? Do we call it a theory if it does not distinguish between those three curves? Okay, that's really the question for me.
Okay.
Yeah, so I was trying to think, systems that have constrained degrees of freedom have been studied quite a lot, right?
Yeah.
Systems with pinning in particular.
Pinning, you mean? Oh, yeah.
Yeah, when you are moving this way. So how would your argument translate in that context?
Pinning particles?
Yeah.
Well, what I had in mind more was
your rotation, but I mean,
was people came up with many those kinetically constraint model where you add constraint and suddenly you have a glass transition, for example. So that would be more something like this curve. Pinning, I didn't think so much about pinning, but can you precise more how it would engage with which argument and with?
I mean, the general protocol, right, is that you have an equilibrium configuration and you can induce a glass transition by pinning a fraction of the particle, and you control this way. And you have both a change in the dynamical transition location, a bit like you're suggesting, but you have very different thermodynamics as well in that case. So
so here I want to stick to cases where it is the same thermodynamics, because I want to make the same.
If you freeze 1 degree of freedom of your ellipsoids, it's the same. You'll also be changing the dynamics.
Are you changing the fact that it would be the same thermal equilibrium? No.
If you pin the orientation of your ellipses, yes.
If you pin the orientation of the ellipses, but you allow them to translate like that, and you start with a uniform distribution of angles, no, you will reach the same state. You will equilibrate the system.
Can I elaborate on the question of Itmar? I think we all agree that your swap, if you want to implement it, it's not a local move. But your answer, in some sense, if you want to implement the breathing, taking this potential for the radius, let me finish just 1 second. You are adding an extra dimension to the space of the movement. So you are no longer in the same space. You have this extra dimension, which is dimension of moving, of changing the radius of the particle. So I think your argument about the barrier, I don't buy it this way, because you are in effect through the extra dimension you are allowing to get around the barriers that you had in the physical space.
Yes. No, that's we argue why swap is much faster. Now the question is more the criticism of the criticism. And
that destroys your argument. Okay, we agree that swap is
so maybe
much
I can phrase it like that. If Berthier, he looks, instead of swapping two particles, he just takes two pairs of particles that are nearby, and he does this. It works the same.
Yeah, but
So I'm just saying, you just do that.
again,
it's a
but if you
local
want
move.
to do that in physical space, I mean, Itmar states it, I agree with him, you will have to move a large number of particles.
Yes,
it will be
but
a
it's
totally
not-
non-local move.
Yes,
so that's
but
not,
yes, but that's not. I don't think that's a critique of the critique. Yeah, I don't dispute that, but I don't see how it. Okay, again, you can. Okay, do you have an answer to that? How do you describe the three completely different dynamics with the theories that just based on thermodynamics? Yes, that's my point. Yeah.
Don't explain with theory angels dancing on me. You're inventing something that doesn't exist, then you want a theory to...
No, but it's very important. It's very important. It's too generic as a theory because the theory doesn't care which of the three dynamics you choose. It's not entering there.
Look, I have the feeling that the type of picture that you are presenting resembles very much what happens in mean field theory, in the sense that in mean field theory we have a dynamic transition which is very well separated by the static one, and the static one happens at a lower temperature. Now, the static correlation lengths should diverge at the Kauffman temperature. And the Kauffman temperature is quite small or correspond to a very high density. So therefore, it's not so important, I would say, if the static correlation lengths the fact that static correlation length does not control the slowing down, I think that there is something that is what it goes toward what is written in the first papers on mean field theory. Because of
okay, so that would be the picture, that it's more the dynamical transitions that controls everything than the static one.
No,
yes,
the
that's
point that would be interesting, and I think that also Francesco Zampone and others working in this direction, if you could find some kind of potential, like the one that we did with Silvio, that capture the different kind of transition. Indeed, some kind of the dynamic transition more or less was captured by the potential that was done, but it did some kind of work. And it's clear that one should try to see when how to modify this kind of potential. And this kind of potential, as suggested also by Zampone and others, should be maybe relevant to capture the position of where
this dynamic transition
dynamics goes up.
Yeah, yeah.
So, if I understand, the type of is something like what people see in normal dynamics is something like the standard dynamic transition in field theory refined with some small tunneling, maybe.
Yeah, no, I feel the same, that it's more this dynamic transition and that it depends on the local rules, and that's what's at the end controlling the event activation. Yeah.
But on the positive side, you can say, okay, it's clear that a prefactor of 15 orders of magnitude is a big prefactor, but you could say
it's going to grow when you
but okay, so as Giorgio was saying, you're talking about, okay, the static transition is very far and you cannot expect, and it's there that lengths matter, and okay, they don't matter so much. But on the positive side, one can say that RFOT also teaches us other things about being out of equilibrium and things that happen.
All the mod couple, all the mod. So I'm just discussing.
But not only the transition itself, which anyway maybe you won't see, but you move the transition and then some of the predictions, this is my feeling, that whenever for some reason the dynamics is slow, then certain things happen that in a way we have learned from RFOT. Now, of course, the cause is a bit different and it doesn't rely on the statics, but that's...
Yeah, no, but so I think that's
a bit
agree
what
with
Giorgio
what
was
Giorgio,
saying.
and I also feel the same, yeah.
So maybe a little comment to answer your question partially is that at least within mean field you can compute exactly the place where the relaxation time will diverge, and when you move from normal dynamics to swap, okay, we did the calculation and indeed it shifts. But also our chairman, Hajime, he did the calculation for rotation, particles with rotation, not really ellipsoids, but patchy particles.
Sorry, Jimmy.
Oh, no, it's fine. And then you get that indeed if you freeze the orientations, you shift in the other direction. I mean, this is mean field. Then, of course, when you try to add nucleation and finite dimensional effects on top of that, I mean, as Giulio, Ludovic, Jean-Philippe pointed out, it's more complicated. So I essentially agree with you, it's complicated. But at least in mean field, this shift is something that you get.
Okay. Hajime, you should have.
Any other, maybe one last comment or question? Oh, Giulio, please.
Yeah. So it's a comment, and we are not going to agree now, but it's just to discuss a little bit more the first criticism. So when you say that you cannot change thermodynamic barrier by changing the local dynamics, I think this is certainly partially true. The problem is that defining the thermodynamics barrier in glasses is very tricky. I mean, in a standard phase transition it's not, but the way we came up with Jean-Philippe to try to define thermodynamic barrier is freezing outside the outside of the cavity. Because in the bulk thermodynamics, it's hard to understand what thermodynamics barriers are. So if you freeze a particle outside the cavity, then it's true that if you change the dynamics, you are not going to destroy thermodynamic barrier. So if you use swap dynamics or if you use normal dynamics, I mean, once you reach the point to set, the time scale is going to diverge like crazy, and you are not able to equilibrate. So from that point of view, you don't change the thermodynamic barrier if you define it properly in this way. Now, the problem is how to go from a frozen cavity to the bulk behavior. And this, of course, is something that, I mean, it's tricky, even theoretically. And this is, well, in the first paper with Jean-Philippe, we say, well, it has to be self-consistent. And of course, we didn't think about possible dynamics. And in the new paper, well, we try to argue that you have to do some, well, self-consistent theory because, well, the boundary should behave like the interior, but then there could be a softness effect. So.
No, that's what I'm saying. But it has to be built, this theory.
And, sorry?
It has. To make it a theory of activation, you need those pre-asymptotic effect, which you're describing now, to be in the theory.
Exactly, but I would say, I mean, of course, if the pre-asymptotic effect, we cannot dream to compute things quantitatively, like, I don't know, I mean, exactly the relaxation time, this looks quite difficult, but I think the very important question is whether or not the point-to-set length has something to do with the increase of the relaxation time. And what we say in the paper is that the answer, when the time starts to increase, is yes. So this is, I mean, I think it's an important statement. Might be wrong, but if it's correct, then it explains why the time scale increase.
Okay, thank you. So we can continue the discussion later. So let's thank our speaker.